Okay, now we are recording, and I don't know if you had a chance to look at the other video, but again, you can hear my voice on the video, but any questions you ask won't be recorded. And let me see if I can pull up that video image like we did last time. Okay, I gotta close this video. Okay. So, we're going to go through the Crystal Studio software. I'm going to show you the functions of the software, and then at the end of the discussion of the functions of the software, and I'll show you a few things in using the machine, we'll talk about the some more technical aspects of the machine. So we'll start by opening a file. And we're going to use the little heart design here. And you'll notice that we can rotate that design using the tools up here on the top toolbar. We can rotate it. We can also, by clicking on this little hand icon, we can then grab the design and move it around on the screen. The red line that you see here, this box, is the printable portion of the heat transfer sheet. In other words, that's the area between these two rollers. And moving the design on the screen changes where it will print on the sheet. So we'll bring it down here in the lower left-hand corner now. And now we're going to go to the Shapes menu. In the Shapes menu, we can do a variety of things with that design. We can scale it up or down for larger or smaller garments. And we can create multiples of it very easily. And then with this distance between copies slider here, we can move the designs further apart or bring them closer together. If we move them further apart, that gives us more space between each design and makes it easier to cut the designs apart. The shapes that you see, the hearts outside of the red box, would not print in that situation. And of course, if we move them closer together, we could fit more of them onto a sheet. So now I'm going to go back to just one design here. And we'll use the zoom tool up here on the top to zoom in so we can see that design a little better. And now we'll go to the Layers menu. The Layers menu is where we really do the rhinestone design part of the job. We have a drop-down menu here that allows us to select the size of the rhinestones we're going to use on each layer. And of course, this is a two-layer design, which means that it was created in CorelDRAW or Adobe Illustrator or Ioline Designer, whatever vector program you're using. It was created in two colors. So when those two colors come into Crystal Studio, they show up as two layers. And you could put different rhinestones on each layer. So on my machine here, I have a 10SS wheel in bowl number 1. Bowl number 1 is the bowl closest to the keypad. So I have a 10SS in bowl number 1, and I have a 16SS in bowl number 2. So I'm going to select 10 for layer 1, and I'm going to select 16 for layer 2. Now, if I had a wheel in the bowl that didn't correspond to the selection I made in the software would tell me. It would say, you've selected a 6SS wheel. Please change the wheel in bowl number 1. So, in other words, the software can tell what wheels you have in each bowl. So now we've selected our stone sizes, and we can go to Layer Visible. And if we click on this little Layer Visible checkbox, you see it places the rhinestones on each layer, on the outline of each layer. And now if I wanted to change the spacing between those stones, I could do that over here where it says Outline Spacing. I could click on this 45 value, and I'll just type in 100. And you see that moves the stones further apart. If I type in a number, I can type in a number down to, well, I'll show you. I can type in a number down to 18, and you see it'll move the stones closer and closer together. However, if I type in a number 17 or lower, you see we see these exclamation points. And those exclamation points are telling you that you have some stones that are beginning to get too close together. It doesn't necessarily mean that they won't print, unless the stones were literally touching or overlapping. You can bring them very close together before they actually would refuse to print, but you'll get a warning. It'll say, you have some stones that are too close together. Are you sure you wish to proceed? And if you say, okay, and then go ahead and click on the Go button, then the machine will go ahead and print the design. If there were stones that were touching or overlapping, the machine would either refuse to print the design or it would delete one of the stones. So I'm going to put this back to 100. Now, if you wanted to fill the inside of a shape, we can go over here to the Fill tool, and we have two types of fill. One is called Hash, and one is called Raster. I'll click on Raster first. And you see Raster gives us a layout of stones that is basically rectilinear or square, and not really a good fit for this particular design. So we'll select Hash. And you see we get a better fit with Hash, but we still have a couple of places where it didn't place a stone. Now, that is because, again, the program is designed to avoid collisions between stones. And so what it's trying to do is to avoid having the fill stones bump into the outline stones. Now, there's a couple of things we could do that would maybe adjust this properly. We can adjust it. We can edit this and tweak it to get it just the way we want it. One way we could do that is to go to the fill spacing and just put in a different value. You just play with different values to see what gives you the sort of fit you might want. This is 50 on fill spacing, and you see that gives us a pretty good fill of that heart, and you might want to add 1 or 2 stones at most. Or go back to 20 there. We do have the ability to go up here on the top toolbar and select the Edit Stones tool, which is this hand with a little white circle behind it. And if we click on that and make it active, we can go down here and we can click on one of the stones with our left mouse key. And you'll see it'll get that little white circle around it, which basically means that that stone is selected. And now if I hold down my left mouse key, I can move that stone by moving the mouse. And if I hit my right mouse key, it'll pop open this little window that allows me to copy that crystal. And if I copy it, I could then come down here below it. I could hit my right mouse key again, and I could paste that crystal. You see it drops in a stone, and we can go back and select that stone, and we can move it. You see we're still getting a little bit of a alarm on the design, but again, just by jiggling the stones a little bit, we can move them to a position where they're all not displaying exclamation points. Now we can also use this other tool we call the stamp, which looks like a rubber stamp up here, and the little icon that looks like a rubber stamp. If we click on that, you see that will give us, if we've selected and copied a stone, it'll give us a stone that we can move around. We can drag it around on the screen. We could bring it to any particular location on the screen or on the design, and then click with our left mouse key, and you see it'll drop a stone there. We could drop another stone here and another one here, however we chose to. And we can turn that tool off by going back and clicking on it again. So you have a couple of different ways that you can kind of tweak or edit the design to get the right appearance of stones that you want. You can also, there's another trick you can do, let's say, where if you click on this little checkbox that says, well, first of all, let's check on that little box that says Use Outline. We're going to turn off Use Outline and watch what happens to the stones when we do that. Now, first of all, it will throw up this warning. It says the layer you are trying to change is locked because it has been edited. If you proceed with this change, all manual edits to this layer will be lost. Are you sure you wish to proceed? It's telling you two things there. One, it's telling you that because you did some manual edits on that layer, because you moved some stones manually, this checkbox over here where it says lock has become checked. And what that simply means is that if you do what we call a global change, like turning off the fill or changing the stone size, anything that would affect the whole layer, this lock checkbox ensures that that change will only be applied to that layer. It won't recalculate the other layers in the design. In other words, if you had already done something to all of those other layers, you don't want them to change. So the checkbox ensures that whatever change you do to this layer is only done to this layer. Also, it's telling you that all your manual edits that you might have done on this layer are going to be wiped out when you do this global change. So generally, in terms of your workflow, you basically want to do your manual edits last after you've done all the other work on the design. So I'm going to go ahead and click on yes. And you see what it did? It reorganized the stones in such a way that it placed the fill stones all the way out onto the outline. Now, obviously, you would still have to do some editing and some tweaking to touch this up and kind of fix the areas where it refused to place a stone, because if it did so, it would be beyond the outline. But you can see it does give you a nice orderly placement of the stones. Now, I'm going to go back. I'm going to check that Use Outline box again, and I'm going to turn off the fill. Now, also, if you look down here at the bottom of the design screen, you'll see there's a little chart that's telling you how many 10SS and how many 16SS stones are in the design. And if we've put in our stone cost out here where it says CrystalPress, it will calculate the cost of the design and give you the cost of the rhinestones being used in that design out here where it says total. So that gives you a way to basically calculate the cost of the design. And also, you can play with the number of stones to kind of vary your cost up or down as you wish to. I should talk a little bit about how we calculate the cost of the stones. Now, you may be aware that with the Ioline rhinestones, as you buy greater and greater quantities of a given stone, the cost per stone gets lower. In other words, you get a break on various quantities. If you bought the clear 10SS rhinestone crystal in the 500 gross quantity, you'd pay about $149 for the design, for the 500 gross. And if you take that $149 and divide it by 500, you'd get to a cost per gross of 30 cents. And of course, there are 144 stones in a gross. So if you took that 30 cents and divided it by 144, that'll give you your cost per stone. And in this case, that comes out to 0.002, which is basically 2/10 of a penny. And likewise, on the 500 gross quantity of the 16 SS stones, down here you'll see that applying the same rule of dividing 500 gross cost by 500 and then dividing that number by 144 gives you a cost per stone of 0.005, in other words, half a penny. So now we're going to go ahead and we're going to go over to the sorter number, and I'm going to select the bowl from which we're going to pick each of the two rhinestones. I'm going to select bowl 1 for the 10SS and bowl 2 for the 16SS. And generally speaking, this means we're ready to print the design, given that you're happy with what you're seeing there on the screen. And when we're ready to print, we simply click on Go down here in the lower left-hand corner. And there's a pause of a few seconds while it's preparing to send the design to the machine. And you can see here now it's beginning to print the stones. Move the camera over so you can see a little better. You see it begins to print at the bottom of the design and prints toward the top. And it picks from each of the two bowls according to whichever stone is next. And it'll place and work its way from bottom to top. Now there are a couple of red lights that you'll be seeing while it's printing. There's a red light over here on the bowl, and that's telling us whether there is a stone in the next cup. If the machine doesn't see a stone in the next cup, it'll move on to the next cup where there is a stone. Also, there's a red light that you'll see on the carriage that's printing the design. The carriage light is telling it whether it's successfully picked up a stone and whether it's successfully put down a stone. If it didn't successfully pick up a stone, it will go back, it will try to apply it again. It'll press again and press harder the second time. If it didn't successfully pick up a stone, I should have said, it will go back and pick up another stone and proceed from there. If, in turn, as I say, if it didn't successfully place the stone, we'll try again and press harder the second time. Now, if you ran low on stones while you were printing, in other words, if the stones in the bowl here got low, the machine would try to pick up a stone 5 times. If it failed after 5 tries, the carriage would stop and the red light on the carriage would flash. And you'd get a message in the software that would say something like, "The C-stick is unable to pick up a rhinestone. Please check the C-stick." Now, if you looked in the bowl and you saw that it was low on rhinestones, all you'd have to do is pour more rhinestones into the bowl and then come over here to the keypad and press this pause play button. And the machine would pick up printing right where it left off. So essentially what that means is that if you run out of rhinestones while you're printing, you don't lose the design. Okay, so here we've printed a design that has 2 layers. Now, if we wanted to do a design that had more than 2 layers, and I'll open one up here. Like this butterfly, we would bring the design in just as we did, and we could go to the layers menu. We could select the first 2 layers. I'm going to select a different size stone here. And we'll just check layer visible, and we'd select the bowls we were going to print from, given that we were happy with the way the stones looked. And then, just as we did with the heart design, we would click on the Go button, and just as it did with the heart design, it would start at the bottom of the butterfly and print to the top. When it got to the top of the butterfly, it would stop, and we would uncheck those 2 layers and check the next 2 layers, and select the bowls we were going to print from. Now, if we then click on the Go button, what will happen is the machine will automatically roll back from the top of the butterfly back to where it began and stop, and then begin to print from bottom to top again. So it would lay down the second 2 layers in register with the first 2 layers. And you could do this again and again. You could do 5 layers, 6 layers, 10, 20, 50, whatever number of layers up to 100. Any questions at this point? Well, in a way, yeah. I mean, in other words, that's where sometimes I'd make a stop in between, the 2-color design and the 4-color design, and ask them questions, right? So anyway, so having printed this design, there's another way we can create a design in the program. We have what's called a text entry tool, and that's up here where you see this T icon on the top toolbar. So I'm going to click on that. And that'll open the text entry screen in the Crystal Studios software. My computer's running a little slow. There. And this tool will allow you to use any TrueType font that's on your computer. And now just lays down text in a straight line. You can't change the spacing or what have you. You could select bold, italic, or underlined if you wished. And you usually want to use a fairly bold or large, or let's say fat typeface that gives a lot of room for the stones to be placed. Now I selected impact here, and we'll type in a word. And we can scale it using this little slider here. And you'll see then we could use our hand tool to grab that, bring it up here, and you could place that design anywhere on the screen. And you see it opens up as another layer menu using the letters you typed in as the file name. Now, we could then simply click on Layer Visible. You see it'll place stones on that design. We could also fill the inside of that design. And just as we talked about earlier, you see it's going to have trouble placing stones in locations where the fill stones bump into the outline stones. So again, we could simply turn off the Use Outline tool. You see we get a good placement of stones. Another thing you might be interested in, if you've already got designs that you created for doing templates or other kinds of methods of creating rhinestone motifs, you can bring in a design that has already been stoned, as we say. In other words, it's got rhinestones on it already. And you see that design will show up as a group of little dots. And if we look at our layer menu here, you'll see that instead of the Use Outline box being checked, the Use Centers box is checked. And so when we click on Layer Visible, you see it places stones directly on top of those little dots, or in other words, directly in the center of each of the little circles from your original file. So if you do have designs that you created in another type of design software, you would have to convert them into a .plt or a .dxf file. And then if you bring them into Crystal Studio has the intelligence to place a rhinestone in the center of each circle. Now, also, you have a menu here called the Sheets menu. And the Sheets menu basically works like a word processing program. In other words, you can have multiple documents open in a word processing program and switch in between them. In the Layers menu, you can have multiple sheets, or rather, I should say in the Sheets menu, you can have multiple sheets, and you can switch between those sheets. So I could, for instance, go over here to the heart.2layer.csp file, and we'll zoom out so we can kind of see that screen a little better. And I could then switch over to the butterfly sheet or what have you. Now, I can also do a function here where if I have a design on the screen, I can click on my right mouse key. This is without turning on any icons. If I click on my right mouse key, it will open up this little box that says Copy Shape, Delete Shape, Zoom Shape. If I click on Copy Shape, now I've copied that entire shape into the memory of the program, and if I hit my right mouse key again, I can paste that shape. And you see now, if we go back to our Layers menu, we have two separate copies of that heart-2layer.plt file. And we could do different things with each one of those copies. In other words, we could make one larger, we could put different stones on it. It's a completely independent version of that same file. Also, if I've copied this file, and I think for some reason that, gee, I could put that file on this other sheet and print them both at the same time, for instance, I can go to another sheet, like go to the butterfly sheet here, the bee fly sheet, and I could hit my right mouse key and click on Paste again, and you see it drops in another copy of that file, which I could, and again, it shows up as another layer menu. I could place stones on it. And if those stones were the same stones as the designs I was using, as the stones I was using on another design, I could print both of those designs at the same time. All I have to do is be sure that whatever designs I want to print, that I have selected Layer Visible for the layers I want to print, and that I've selected a bowl. So let's say, for instance, here I'll select a bowl for that heart-2layer file, a bowl for each of those two layers. And if those two layers were, or stone sizes, let's say, were the same as the stone sizes I was going to use on the other program or the other file I was going to print, I could hit Go, and it would print both of those designs in their respective locations. Now, this is a good time to take a look at this little drop-down menu here that allows us to see different views of the design. If I click on this little drop-down menu on the top toolbar, the first choice, Design, shows both the vectors in the design and the stones on the design. If I click on Vectors, you see it takes away the rhinestones and just shows us the vectors. If I click on Crystals, it'll show us the crystals, but without the vectors. And if I click on Preview, you'll notice the word Joanne disappeared. Now it disappeared because we had not selected a bowl for that particular file. So what that means, of course, is that if I clicked on Go, since I didn't select a bowl, it's not going to print that particular file. And clicking on Preview basically tells you what layers are going to print when you click on Go. So that's what it does. Then finally, we have Machine View. If you click on that, you see what it does is flip the layers that are going to be printed, and it shows you where they're going to be printed on the sheet, given that you start, at this bottom origin point on the sheet. So we'll go back to Design here. Oops. And now we'll take a quick look at a couple of other things you can do with the software before we go on to the machine itself. First of all, of course, you can save a file, and it would save the file as a .csp file, which you could then open again anytime, and it would bring the stones and the design back as it was when you saved it. You could click on Save File As, and that would simply, once again, save the file, but you could give it a different name or save it in a different location. You could click on Printing. And when we click on that, if your computer is hooked up to a paper printer, you could print what you have on the screen on a piece of paper. You could use this for a job file, or you could send it to your customer. You'll notice down here on the bottom it allows you to print on paper, save it as a PDF file, and you could email that to the customer, save it as a JPEG image, embed that into your email and send that to the customer. And if you wanted to, you could put in information up here at the top. And if we click on the Update Preview button, you see it'll place that information at the top of the page. Now, down at the bottom here, you'll notice it's kind of defaulting to giving you the number of stones in the design and the cost of the designs on that page. If you don't want your customer to see that information, you can simply go up here where it says Display Crystal Counts and uncheck that information. Click on Update Preview. And you see it won't display that information. You can just send it to the customer that way. You can also export a file. In other words, you could bring this sheet, you could export this sheet as a JPEG image. You could bring that sheet over into CorelDRAW or Adobe Illustrator or Eyeline Design. If you downloaded a picture of the garment that you were going to put the design on, you could superimpose that JPEG image on top of the garment and send that to the customer. And that way they could see what the garment was going to look like and what the rhinestones would look like on that garment. It also allows you to copy the sheet data, which is the price of the rhinestones, the number of rhinestones in the design, so on and so forth, as a CSV file that you could bring into a spreadsheet like Excel and use that to keep track of your rhinestone usage on your jobs. close that. Also, by the way, if you were going to superimpose this design on a shirt, what you might want to do in the layers menu is you could change the color of the respective layers of the design to exactly match whatever color you were going to use in your rhinestone design. Like if you want to do it in sapphire, you could click on blue. And you see it'll change the color of each layer, or of each layer of stones in your design. Okay? All right. Now we're going to take a look at a couple of things on the machine itself. It's very important to understand the function of the reset button here on the keypad. The pause play button that you see here, if we press that, notice this light up here goes to red from green. Red means that if you try to send a design to the machine won't receive it. In other words, it's got to be green for it to be online with the computer and to receive a design that you send to it. But when that red light is pressed, these two arrow keys become active, which means that we can move the sheet forward and backwards, or up and down, however you want to look at it. Now, if we move the sheet down, let's say about that far, and we pressed the reset button, the light will go green, and wherever that sheet is positioned, this now becomes the new start point. In other words, the design is going to print from this location toward the top of the sheet. So it's going to print up that way. Now, if we wanted that design to print next to the previous design, well, we would, then, in that case, have to move the design on the screen. We'll go back to our heart sheet here. And if I wanted to print a second design directly next to where I printed the previous design, had I not pressed reset on the keypad, when I move this design over to the right, and you've got a scale here on the program, and you've got a scale on the machine that essentially tell you how wide this design is and so on. If I want to place that next to this one, and I hadn't pressed reset, when I hit go, the sheet would automatically roll back and put that heart design directly to the left of the previous design. So I'm going to move that, I'm going to press the pause play button, and I'm going to move that design, move us back to where we were previously. And I'm going to press the reset button. And now, essentially, it's going to begin to print right here when I send the design. Now, what happens with a lot of people who first get the system and start printing, they'll put a sheet in, they'll print out a whole bunch of designs, they'll take that sheet out, they'll put another sheet in, and they'll go back and they'll click on go again. And the sheet that they put in will suddenly just shoot out the back of the machine. And the reason it's doing that is that if you didn't hit reset when you put that new sheet in, it's going to try to return to where it began printing on the previous sheet. See, it doesn't know that you put a new sheet into it. So essentially, when you put a new sheet in the machine, it is important to always press the reset button. You want to be sure you see that light go red and green. So now essentially we're ready to print this design right next to the previous design. And I'm going to click on go. Again, there'll be kind of a pause while it's getting ready to print. Now you see it's beginning to print, essentially right next to the one we just did. Now, if you've made a mistake, and one thing I've done many times is I will go to send a design and there's already a design in that location. So it begins to print one design on top of the other. And I say, oh my gosh, I got to stop it. So what I do is I go over to the keypad and I press the pause play button. And you'll see the machine will stop almost immediately. And now, if that design had been printing on top of the other design, or there was anything else wrong about the design, I would have to delete that design. And because the program is still trying to send a design to the machine, we have to delete that information out of the buffer memory of the machine and out of the computer itself. Now you'll notice that down in the lower right-hand corner, there's a little illustration of the CrystalPress. And that illustration, you'll see also, has a carriage that is moving back and forth. Essentially, that's telling you that the machine is trying to send a file, or rather that the computer is trying to send a file to the machine. So if we click on that illustration with our left mouse key, it opens up what we call the I/O line print queue. And this essentially tells you a bunch of things about what the machine is doing. Over here where it says File, it shows the job that's being printed. It tells you how much progress it has made printing that job. If you had more than one machine hooked up to the program, it would tell you which machine was which over here where it says Machines, and that in turn would allow you to send different files to each machine. And then down here where it says Status, it tells you what's going on. It tells you what the system is doing. Right now it says it's printing. Now, if we click on this file that we were printing and we want to delete it out of the memory of the machine, we can select it by clicking on it and then click on the little X down here at the bottom. And it'll throw up a warning that says it's currently printing. Canceling it will stop the sending data and remove it from the print job list, but it will not stop the machine from working. In other words, there's still information in the buffer of the machine itself. But if we click on this, you'll notice now the little carriage on the illustration of the CrystalPress has stopped moving left and right. So essentially, you've stopped sending information to the machine. Now, if you come back to the keypad on the machine and you press Reset, you see the carriage returns to the left side of the machine, parks, and now you've deleted that file from the print queue and from the buffer memory of the machine. So essentially now you're ready to go bring the file back up and send it again, making whatever corrections you need to make. Now also, there are a few things that you need to be aware of that might or could go wrong with the machine. And perhaps, for instance, you send a design to the machine and it begins to try to pick up stones. In other words, it picks up a stone and it drops it. Or it picks up a stone and places it on the edge of the sheet. Or it keeps picking up stones and placing them on the edge until it stops, and then you get a flashing red light and a message from the program. Essentially, there are some things that can happen that will cause the machine to misbehave like that. One thing is that you've got a vacuum here, of course, that sucks up the stones, picks up the stones, and holds the stones until it places them on the sheet. Well, this tip here, the course, draws air through the tip. And if it drew a little chunk of glass or dust or dirt or anything that blocked that tip, it would start to drop stones because it couldn't exert the suction to hold them. And if it did that, it would try to pick up stones but keep dropping them. So what you would do to check on that is remove the C-stick tip, either hold it up to a light or look through it, whatever, so that you can see whether there's anything blocking the tip. If there is something, just blow it out or maybe poke it out of there with a paper clip. And also you want to check this little tip of this spring here, because sometimes a piece of glass or what have you can get jammed in there. So you just want to make sure this is clean and clear. And you put the tip back on. It's also possible to lose this little black rubber tip here. If you lose that, you'll have a lot of trouble picking up a stone. The system, when it was new, came with an additional tip. It's not a bad idea to buy a package of 3 additional tips. They're about $50, and you can have some on hand in case you ever need them on another occasion. Another thing that can happen, you have this black fiber optic tube here. You want to make sure that the C-stick is clamped into place firmly, like so. But you have this fiber optic tube which is held in this capture nut on top of the carriage. You want to be sure that that is fully, completely seated. In other words, you can pull it out like so. You want to, when you feed it into the capture nut, you'll feel it hit bottom. So you want to know that it's all the way in, and then you tighten that capture nut to be sure that it's tight. So be sure, if that's not fully seated, you'll get error messages from the machine. Now, another thing that can happen, and it shouldn't happen often, is the machine can lose adjustment in its left or right motion. In other words, this C-stick is supposed to come over here to this topmost stone and be placed and go down on top of that stone and land squarely in the middle of the stone. If it is off slightly to the left or right, it will have trouble picking up the stone. It may drop them. It may pick up a stone and think that it didn't pick up the stone and then go back, place the stone on the edge of the sheet and go back for another. Or it'll just fail to pick up the stone. Now, if any of those things happen, there is a very simple adjustment procedure to locate the stone or to move the tip of the C-stick directly above the stone. We don't talk about that here in the training because you may not see that problem for years. On the other hand, I have seen machines that perhaps got shaken up in transit where you had to do an alignment procedure like that immediately upon starting to try to use the machine. If the machine gives you trouble in terms of picking up stones and is dropping them or placing them on the edge of the sheet, call the factory. Talk to either Kyle, Russ, or George. They're the folks to talk to if you have any kind of hardware problem. But call the factory, talk to them, and they'll show you how to do the alignment procedure if that's what the machine needs. And once you've seen how to do it once, you'll understand it completely. It's really a very simple procedure. Another thing to be careful of on the machine is that you have these screws on the face of the bowl. They adjust the placement of the bowl inward and outward. Don't touch them unless the folks at the factory tell you to do so, because they should be fixed in position. And if you change them and it gets out of alignment in that axis, it'll be very hard to get it back into alignment. So another thing to be sure of is that you're careful and that you don't kind of knock the machine over or bang into these, which would in turn knock them out of adjustment. Okay? Joanne, I missed one thing. I didn't talk about changing stones in the bowls. I usually do that as part of the, the presentation of the four-layer design. Essentially what we do, we'll go back here to the butterfly design. And essentially what I was talking about there, I would say, after we print the first two designs, of course, we have to change out the stones in the bowls. So we would do that. It's very simple to do. We flip this little sweep assembly out of the way. Move this knob. And we'll pull out the wheel. You see, of course, all the stones or rhinestone crystals fall down into the bottom of the bowl. Then below the bowl here, there's a bar, which we call the dump gate. And if we put our container underneath the dump gate and press down on that bar, see the rhinestones fall out into whatever container we're using. A lot of people use those Glad containers you can get at the grocery store. And then we can put our wheel back in. Tighten down the hub or the knob on there. Pour in the next color of rhinestones. Close up the sweep assembly. And the machine will index and get itself ready to print. Now you would do that with both bowls. It takes about 30 seconds a bowl if you're not explaining it. And then essentially you're ready to send the next two layers to the machine. And as I said, it would roll back to where it began and print layers 3 and 4 in register with layers 1 and 2. Now, one other thing you want to be sure of when you're working with the machine is not to overfill this bowl. What you see in the bowl right now, about halfway up this central hub of the wheel, is a good quantity of rhinestones to put into it. If you pour in too many rhinestones, what will happen is that rhinestones will get packed up under this clear shield. If they get stuck under that shield and packed up under there, there is a little sweep, or scraper we call it, this little piece here, that is supposed to capture any stones going by that are in the cups upside down and scrape them away so that they don't get up here to the machine and be placed. So if this area here under that clear shield becomes filled with stones, then they will push up this scraper and it won't be able to do its job. And you'll start to get upside down stones showing up at the top here, and they'll get placed on your design and you'll have upside down stones on your design. Close that back up. One other thing that I've seen happen is if a bit of dirt or dust or anything, or glass or what have you, gets stuck down in the bottom of this cup, the machine will come to that cup and it will think there's a stone in the cup. And the C-stick will try to pick up the stone, and it realizes as soon as it picks up that it didn't get a stone. So it will then go over and it'll sort of damp itself on the edge of the sheet here. And it'll leave a little white imprint. And then it'll come back and go on to the next stone and pick that stone up and proceed as normal. And you'll start to see little white imprints on the edge of the sheet here. Obviously, all you need to do then is take the bowl out, or take the wheel out, and hold it up to the light, see if any of those holes in the bottoms of the cups are blocked. And if it is blocked, again, just clean it out with a paper clip or something of that nature. Okay, do you have any questions? Okay. I think I covered most of what we needed to talk about. So I'm going to stop the recording now.